Alhamdulillah. Maybe one day, inshallah, she'll be teaching up here instead of me and Ustad Murphy. So, alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. So, alhamdulillah, Ramadan, week one almost in the books, right? Which is, subhanAllah, something crazy to comprehend and think about. Last Soul Food, last Thursday, we were all talking a little bit about, anticipating the first night of prayer, anticipating the first day of fasting. And subhanAllah, as quickly as it arrived, the first week is almost departing us. So it really kind of teaches us a little bit about the reality and the true nature of time, right? So hopefully, the dua as week one is about to be, in the books, the dua for all of us, including myself, should be that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepts all the effort that we put in the first 6 days, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala increases our efforts and increases the barakah in the next 3 weeks, inshallah, of the month of Ramadan, because it's a guest that you never like to see leave, right? So subhanallah is something that we want to make sure that we take advantage of while it's here. So as Ustad Murphy probably also mentioned on Mondays, these weeknight classes, at least prior to daylight savings, we wanted to keep a little bit shorter because 7:19, 7:20, and then Salatul Isha is at 8:15. So we want to make sure that we're able to kind of get everybody in their Salah spots on time around 8 o'clock. So the sessions are going to be only about 35 to 40 minutes maximum. But inshallah, we hope that these programs are very, very, sweet and very, very wholesome in terms of the time, inshallah. So the series that I wanted to focus on in the month of Ramadan specifically is a series called Seeking Allah. Okay, what does it mean to seek Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? When you call for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when you're looking for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what does that mean for the individual? How does a person find Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in their life, right? There are narrations in hadith and also there are ayat in the Quran where Allah ta'ala, He mentions that, if my believing servant thinks of me or asks about me, He tells the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? إِذَا سَأَلَكَ عِبَادِي عَنِّي, right? If my servant asks about me, tell them فَإِنِّي قَرِيب. Tell them that I'm close, okay? So the first thing that I want everyone to kind of know as we approach this series is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is never far from the individual. It is the individual that actually distances themselves from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This kind of idea that I feel far from Allah. I feel very, very distant from my Creator. Know that that is not something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does towards His servant. It is something the servant does when it comes to their own hindrance of their relationship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Imam al-Ghazali rahimahullah, he mentions one time in Ayyuha al-Walad, the famous book that we actually went over just a few months ago here on Thursday nights, he said that one of the proofs, alamat, one of the signs that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has turned away from His creation is that they busy themselves with things that do not concern them, right? So even the phrase that Allah has turned away, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala never turns away from a person. It's a person who begins to turn themselves away from Allah because of the choices that they make in their life, okay? So how does a person, especially in the month of Ramadan, begin to close that gap between them and Allah? How do you close that distance? How do you become closer and closer to Allah to the point where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala becomes second nature to this person, right? How many people are watching the current Sheikh Omar Suleiman series right now, right? It's mashallah. I mean, he puts in so much work, the whole Yaqeen team. One of the things that was mentioned in one of the videos that he posted was this idea that when you think of like your algorithm, right? Like your For You page, you built that thing, right? Let's understand that. Every video that you have on there, it's your doing. It's not anybody else. You're like, oh my God, why'd that show up on my For You page? Habib, you did it, okay? Congratulations. You can thank yourself at the end of the day. So a part of that reminder, subhanAllah, which is so powerful, he said that your closeness to Allah is also something that you build up. So if you feel distant from Allah, it's not Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who's responsible for that. Ask yourself, what are the choices that I made to make me feel this way? Do I feel distant because I had a chance to do something that was pleasing to Allah, but I chose the opposite? That I have a chance to pray, but I chose to forego that salah? That I have a chance to give and I didn't give at that exact moment? So the believer begins this journey of seeking Allah by asking themselves, where am I with Allah? You have to kind of assess your relationship. And this is extremely important. Why? Because you can't improve on something unless you are honest about where you are of that relationship in the first place. If I have this kind of notion in my mind that, no, I'm good. I'm good. I don't need to improve anything. I'm fine. Then you'll constantly disappoint yourself because reality does not measure up to what you're saying. If there is a weakness, if there is a kind of a little bit of a challenge in that relationship, admit that challenge. When we went into Ramadan last week, did we just say like, yeah, you know what? I don't really have any goals. Yeah, I don't really have anything that I want to accomplish. Or did we head into Ramadan last Thursday, last Friday and say, yeah, you know what? I am not where I want to be. I'm not proud of where I am right now. And I want to get somewhere better. So that initial admitting of where you are is going to help us close that gap between us and our Creator. So the way that we're going to do it on Thursday nights, inshallah, is that we're going to, inshallah, seek Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through some very beautiful ayat of the Quran that literally ask for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's help, okay? And, we're going to begin with a particular surah today that sometimes, the average Muslim, we kind of like make fun of other people. Oh, you're reciting that surah again in your prayer? Oh, God, you just might want to get it over with, right? Like, that's the kind of vibe that we see or we hear about when we recite certain of these surahs. But today, when we go over the particular surah today, you'll see, subhanAllah, how wrong it is to ever assume badly of a person who recites some of these surahs, inshallah. So we're going to begin today with Surah Al-Ikhlas. Surah Al-Ikhlas is something that everybody knows, right? Surah Al-Ikhlas, inshallah, everyone kind of has heard of it. Everyone has memorized it. Everyone kind of, understands generally what the meaning is. قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ اللَّهُ الصَّمَدُ لَمْ يَلِدْ وَلَمْ يُولَدْ وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ. Very, very short surah. But this surah is something, subhanAllah, the Prophet ﷺ, he said, is there a person here who knows how to recite a third of the Quran in one night? Okay? He would ask this question to his Sahaba. Does anybody in here know how to recite a third of the Quran in one evening? And everyone is thinking to themselves, like, how is that possible? How can I read a third of an entire Quran in just one evening? I'm like struggling to do a few pages. Even in Taraweeh, you basically are reading like a certain, amount of ajza, and then you basically kind of end for the evening because that's as much as you can do. So they asked, Ya Rasulullah, what do you mean? How can somebody realistically recite a third of the Quran? And the Prophet ﷺ, he would say, do you not know Qul huwa Allahu ahad? If you know Qul huwa Allahu ahad, it is as though you know a third of the entirety of the book of Allah. Why? Because Qul huwa Allahu ahad literally is a surah that helps you completely understand who Allah is, and it completely negates anything He is not in your life. And I'll tell you what, a lot of that relationship that we spoke about a few minutes ago is a misunderstanding to who Allah is, right? I'll give you a very easy example. When a person becomes upset that bad things are happening in their life, right? And a person says to themselves, well, why would God allow that to happen to me? Why would Allah allow me to go through that? That question, although it's a good question, asked in the wrong way can paint the wrong picture of who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. Because the person, when they ask that question, they're frustrated, right? They're going through something difficult and they're asking, why would God, who is Ar-Rahman, He is all merciful, He is all forgiving, He is all kind and all generous, why would a God that has that type of description allow me to go through a very severe illness? Or why would a God like that allow me to go through a traumatic situation that I went through in my life? And if the understanding is, well, Allah only is supposed to give me things that are good, that I like, then that is the misunderstanding of who Allah is, right? So we need to reorient who Allah is in our lives and in our minds, okay? So a couple of really interesting kind of beautiful narrations about Qul Huwallahu Ahad. There was actually a story of a man from the Ansar. He was one of the Medinan companions of the Prophet ﷺ. And he used to always recite Surah Al-Ikhlas in every one of his prayers. So the irony is that he had like a very beautiful voice, right? What happens when you have a very beautiful voice and you're leading salah? What do people usually want you to do? Read what? Longer surahs, right? You're like, man, keep going, bro. Like more, right? Like read Baqarah, read Imran, read Nisa, right? Read these longer surahs. Don't give us Kawthar and Ikhlas, man. Come on now, right? Like that's what we do, right? So some of the companions, they would go to they would go up to this man, they would say, and so he would recite Surah Al-Ikhlas, and he would also recite a surah after it. He would do Ikhlas, and then he would do another surah after. So some of the companions, they would go up to him and they would say, you should begin your prayer with this surah, and you should basically only do this surah or another surah. Don't do two surahs together. And so you know what he responded? He said, I will not ever leave Ikhlas. He goes, I will never leave Ikhlas. If you want me to continue leading you in prayer, I'm going to read Ikhlas in every prayer that we pray together. Can you imagine that? Like an imam is like, yeah, you're going to come to my masjid? Get ready for Ikhlas 1, 2, and 3. Fajr, Maghrib, and Isha. That's all you're going to hear. So the companions were like confused. Like, why is this guy so in love with Surah Al-Ikhlas? And then, you know, they used to consider him, like I said, like one of the best people to lead salah ever, right? And so when the Prophet ﷺ became informed of this particular situation, right? He went up to this man and he said, Ya Fulan. He goes, Ya Fulan. What prevents you from doing what your companions are asking you to do? Like, read Ikhlas sometimes and read another surah sometimes, right? And then the Prophet, or the man, he responded to the Prophet ﷺ and he says, Ya Rasulullah, I love it. Because I love it. It's as simple as that. Every time I recite Qul Huwallahu Ahad, my heart fills up with love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I cannot leave it. And the Prophet ﷺ, he says, Hubbuka iyaha adkhalaka al-jannah. He says, your love that you're talking about right here, this love right here, adkhalaka al-jannah. It's going to cause you to enter paradise just because you love it so much. Could you imagine this? So, you know, a lot of times, again, rewiring the brain, a lot of times we think to ourselves that in order to attain Jannah, it's always about like doing action, 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 action. And yes, there is obviously merit to doing things in your life. But subhanAllah, the Prophet ﷺ told a man who merely said, I love Qul Huwa Allahu Ahad. I just love that surah. He says, you will enter paradise because of the love that you have for that surah. So I want you guys to think about this. What are the loves in your life? What type of love do you have that will acquire your Jannah for you? Do you love something that Allah loves so much that that love in and of itself will allow you to enter paradise? And this is why, by the way, it's so encouraged to fall in love with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. A person who loves Allah's messenger, the way that Allah loves his messenger, when you and Allah both love the same thing, Allah Ta'ala will admit you to paradise just because of that love that you have. And by the way, true love is never something that just stays in the heart. You guys agree with that? True love is never something that stays just in the heart. Love always manifests itself into some sort of action. If I love my mother, I can never just tell her that, like, you know what? You know that I love you. Like, why do I need to show you that love? No, no, no. And you guys know this as well, right? Parents. Is it enough for parents just to be like, yeah, don't I take care of you? Isn't that love, right? Old school. And you're like, no, like, sometimes I love you would be nice, right? Like, sometimes a nice little kind of like gesture of kindness would be acceptable, right? Why? Because true love never ever stays only as an intention. True love will always come out as action. And so this man who said, Ya Rasulullah, I love Surah Al-Ikhlas, and he says, Hubbuka iyaha adkhalaka al-jannah. This love that you have for Ikhlas will allow you to enter paradise because that love for it allowed him to recite it, right? So this Ramadan, you guys are all going through this exact kind of experience where what you claim to love is going to be questioned by your actions. If I love Allah, can I spend an extra raka'ah in the masjid and pray? Or is it going to be like all those TikTok videos after 8, I'm just going to look at my friend and be like, right? Shadia, let's go, man. You know, Saifani is open. Let's go hit it up. Or am I going to be the one that encourages my friends sometimes, hey, you know what? Like, it's a Thursday, it's a Friday, it's a Saturday. We don't have class tomorrow. Let's just stay in the masjid until 20, right? Like, I can either, like, after I'm done with my iftar, I can either go and hang out and like kill time, or I can stay in the masjid and read a little bit of my own Quran, sit and read a little bit about Islam, and then get in my spot for salah. Because those types of actions prove that you love Allah, right? So this is where the actions really, subhanAllah, come into play with your intentions. And so there's, a beautiful, beautiful narration here where, subhanAllah, Imam Malik ibn Anas, he said that he heard Abu Hurairah saying that I went out with the Prophet ﷺ and he heard a man reciting. The Prophet ﷺ heard a man reciting Qul huwa Allahu ahad in Medina. So the Prophet ﷺ, he went up to Abu Hurairah as they were. I just want you to imagine him and Abu Hurairah are walking by. They heard a man reciting Qul huwa Allahu ahad, and the Prophet leans into Abu Bakr and he says wajabat. The word wajabat. The word wajabat, by the way, means that something has become obligatory for him. Okay, wajabat. That whatever it is has become obligatory. So Abu Hurairah, he says, what? What is obligatory? Like, what does that mean? You left it kind of ambiguous. And the Prophet, he says Jannah. Did you imagine? He just heard a man reciting Ikhlas and he says wajabat. What's mandatory? And the Prophet says Jannah is mandatory for him. He is reciting Ikhlas with so much love that Jannah is obligatory for him. I want you guys to imagine, and again, he didn't say this to the man, he said this to Abu Hurairah. Because again, sometimes when you say this to the people themselves, they're like, oh, cool, sounds good, right? Like, no, he wanted Abu Hurairah to know about it. If this man sincerely continues on this path, know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make Jannah as mandatory as it is for a person to pray 5 times a day for this guy. Because of how much he loves this surah, okay? So, in here, inshallah, I want to break down some of the verses, inshallah, that Surah Al-Ikhlas offers us, okay? Surah Al-Ikhlas, by the way, is given as a direct response from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to people who choose to give the rights of Allah to anyone but Him. And I want you guys to think about this, right? A lot of people, they're thinking to themselves, like in modern day times, right? Like, if I'm a Muslim, I don't have to worry about that whole idolatry situation, right? Like, oh, I don't worship idols, so like I don't have to worry about that particular sin. But the reality is, it's not just about worshiping outright. It's about giving the rights of Allah to anyone but Him, okay? So when you think about things, for example, like if a person is thinking to themselves that my money is what makes me make my decisions, right? My wealth is what affects my decisions and what I do morally, then you're actually treating your wealth like a point of moral judge. You're saying that my wealth is actually what dictates my morality and the things that I do in my life. So you're giving the right of Allah to your wealth. If I allow myself to do anything that my friends influence me to do, right? I am taking something that I should be taking from Allah, a source of authority, and now I just do whatever the people around me do, okay? So this is also, subhanallah, this is why the Prophet ﷺ, he used to say something very, very profound. He used to say, for my own ummah, the Muslims in my community, the people who believe in Allah, I don't fear for them the major form of associating partners with Allah. He says, I fear for them the minor form of it. And so the companions, they'd be like, Ya Rasulullah, what is a minor form of associating with Allah? Like, I thought there was only one kind of baseline standard for that. And he said the minor form of associating partners with Allah is ar-riya, is showing off. Why would showing off be a form of shirk, according to the Prophet ﷺ? Anybody know? Yeah. Exactly. What she said was exactly correct. That your ultimate hope to please should be Allah. But showing off puts that effort away from Allah. It takes it away from Allah and it puts it towards people around you to get their stamp of approval, right? And this is why, subhanAllah, like the social media generation is so scary, because we are constantly, drowning in this kind of never-ending whirlpool of, does that person like what I just did? Does that person like what I just said? If my tweet didn't get enough retweets, like, was it really a good tweet? If my post wasn't really liked by that many people, was it really a good post? We're constantly thinking to ourselves. Like, I want you guys to do like a spiritual exercise. If you just prayed your salah, right? If you just prayed your salah and nobody recognized you, nobody praised you, nobody did anything to you. And then another scenario is you prayed that exact same salah and like 40 people came up to you and be like, MashaAllah, MashaAllah, oh my God, that was amazing. That was so good. I can't believe like you pray so well. Would you feel better about your salah because those 40 people praised you? In terms of ikhlas, sincerity, you should actually feel the same whether somebody praises you or not, because you know the ultimate one who is supposed to be pleased is Allah. You can be praised by 100,000 people in your life, and Allah can find what you did, something that was incorrect, and you would have no blessing in what you just did. And this is why there are people who have millions of dollars and their money has no barakah in it. And because they make it in such a horrible way. They cheat, they lie, they steal, they rob other people. But people sometimes make a little bit of money and they have blessings in it. Why? Because they made it in a way that they know that Allah is happy with it, right? And this goes with the decisions you make in your life. Certain decisions, you're like, you know what? That decision is going to give me ease in my life. And that decision caused you to do something haram. Or that decision caused you to do something that was not okay. And although that decision supposedly was supposed to make your life easier, for some reason it made your life more difficult. But then when you made that one decision for the sake of Allah, with Allah in mind, and from the outside, it looked like it was supposed to be something that made your life difficult, but subhanAllah, it actually made your life easier. Look at your fasting. Look at your fasting. You are not eating right now for like 13 hours in the day, right? You're not eating from like 5:40 until like 6:25, right? It's a serious amount of time. Logically, you should be miserable. You should be like the most hangry, unbearable people like ever to exist. But look at everybody around here. Everyone's smiling. Everyone's talking to each other. Everyone's being kind to each other. Everyone's being merciful to each other. For the first time in the lines at Suhbah, people are saying, no, you go ahead, right? Like, instead of other nights where it's like, put that matcha in my veins right now, right? Like the matcha addicts are for real here, guys. Like, subhanallah, we're gonna have a drink inshallah soon where it just goes direct IV into your arm inshallah, so that like you're fine. But you see, like, Ramadan proves that people, when they make decisions for the sake of Allah, they end up having blessing in whatever they decide, right? And so we'll begin inshallah with Qul huwallahu ahad. This is really interesting, okay? Qul huwallahu ahad. Anybody know the translation of that generally? Qul means what? Say, right? Qul huwa. What does huwa mean in Arabic? He, okay? Allah, obviously meaning Allah. Ahad. Ahad, by the way, in Arabic means not just one, but ahad means one that is incomparable to anyone around, okay? Because one in Arabic is wahid, okay? Ahad is a little bit different. Ahad means that there is no second to who they are, right? Ahad is on a level of its own. So in verse 1, you're saying, Qul, Allah is commanding you to say, Qul, say, He, Allah, is one. Okay? Now here's something really interesting. The Quran, by the way, I want you guys, and I want everyone to kind of really deepen their relationship with the Quran. And by the way, through this, you'll deepen your relationship with Allah. Allah could have easily said, I'll tell you something kind of crazy here. Allah could have easily said, Qul Allahu Ahad. It would have generally meant the same thing. Say Allah is Ahad. But why did Allah say Qul Huwa Allahu Ahad? Say He is Allah who is the only one. It's almost like a really cool, like poetic form of literature where what you see in the Quran is Allah wants you to focus on Allah and not just Ahad. So Allah says Qul Huwa. Say He is Allah who is Ahad. Because a lot of people at that time used to worship other things that they used to say is Ahad. Oh, my idols are one. You know, this that I worship is one. The Jews used to worship something else. The Zoroastrians used to worship something else. And they would always say, that's the one to worship. That's the one to worship. So Allah refutes that and He says, Qul huwa Allahu. No. You don't worship the right deity. Allah is the only one who's worthy. You know, there's a really interesting, I forgot who was saying this the other day. I can't remember who it was. But it was a conversation where basically someone was talking about that they were speaking to somebody of another faith who basically worshiped like multiple gods. And they were saying, like, we're so fortunate. Like, if one God is too tired to answer my prayer, I'll go to another one. You know, like, and if that God's too tired, then I go to another one. I go to the third one, or the fourth one, or the fifth one. And then subhanAllah, as Muslims, it's so incredible. you have such a blessing in your life that the same Allah that you go to for your pain is the same Allah that you go to when you go through your gratitude. The same Allah that you go to when you're crying is the same Allah that you go to when you're happy. The same Allah that you go to when you have anxiety is the same exact Allah that you go to when you're excited. Allah is not burdened by anyone or anything. There is a narration about, particularly in Ramadan, a person who feeds one fasting person, a person who feeds one singular fasting person, they will get the reward of that entire person without diminishing their reward at all. So you think to yourself, like, subhanAllah, in our logical brains in this world, if I give like $5 out of my $100 on my bank account, now I'll have $95. Allah doesn't work like that. If Allah gives, Allah is not taken away from by any means whatsoever. Actually, the analogy that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives is, if I give a blessing to somebody, it's as though you dip a needle into the sea and you have a few drops of water, or maybe a tiny little drop of water coming to the edge of that needle, and that ocean, that is like the example of what I just gave to this person. And it could have been like $1 million. You see? So like, there is no taking away from Allah. And this is why He is Qul huwa Allahu ahad. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, Allahu samad. Okay? A samad is super interesting. By the way, the word samad, this is the only time in the entire Quran where the word samad is used. You know why? Because samad is something that is so specific to Allah through its meaning. Samad means someone that everyone relies upon, and the one who relies upon no one. So everyone relies upon God, but God does not rely upon any person. Okay? And this is such a humbling thing for a believer to understand. If I believe in Allah, I know that everything in my life depends on Him. And I want you guys to think about it. No matter how wealthy or strong or independent you are, you will always find in your life that you're depending upon something. And by the way, you can do this exercise yourself. Every single person in here. Think about what your dependencies are. What are something that you're dependent upon? You're dependent upon your job to give you money. You're dependent upon your family to help you out before you get a job. You're dependent upon your house to give you shelter. You're dependent upon the sun to give you warmth. You're dependent upon your AC in your car to cool you in the summertime. You're dependent upon water and food to nourish you in your day. I mean, there is no human being, there is no creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that can claim that they're free from any sort of dependency. In fact, everything that you do, like right now sitting here, you're dependent upon probably like 100 things. You are dependent upon your heart pumping blood to you. If that stops for like 2 seconds, you're done. It's over, right? You're dependent upon that. You worship one that is dependent upon absolutely nothing. And that is the only one worthy of worship. Because if Allah, a'udhu billah, depended upon anything, then Allah would not be worthy of worship, right? Allah is the first, He is the last. And this is why we say, when a person passes away, what's the dua that we make? Anybody? Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un, right? We say that whenever somebody passes away from this dunya. What does it mean? Indeed, we are from Allah. We came from Him. Before Allah created us, we were nothing. Your parents, I want you guys to think about this. Can you guys imagine? It's like a weird thing because I'm a parent now, so I think about these things. I have memory of a life before my daughter. Your parents all have memories of life before you. At one point, they didn't know this little stinker was going to come out, right? Like asking for like FAFSA help and like, you know, when's my first car, right? Where is that going to come from, right? No, your parents had a life before that. And your grandparents had a life before your parents. And so on and so forth. You right now, I know it's kind of incredible to think about, right? But you right now, inshallah, in 20 years, 30 years, you are going to look so different. You're going to be so different. And you're going to have things in your life that you're like, ugh, where'd you come from, right? Like, no way you can predict these things. You have so many things in your life that you depend on, and then eventually, inshallah, will depend on you. But that one pillar in your life that you will always depend upon, that never depends on anyone else, is Allah. And that's the only one worthy of worshiping. And this is why relying on wealth, relying upon fame, you know, you guys are going to literally just chalk me up as like a brain rotted person. But that TikTok page of that guy who was like had that 9 to 5 like whatever, like he was like a 9 to 5 like going to office and blah blah blah, and like he became famous from that. It was like a mundane TikTok page. Apparently, he basically like quit his job, and then now he's like he basically rented out like a fake office so he can continue to do his thing. And all his followers are like super disappointed. They're like, so now he just going to like a fake desk and working a fake 9 to 5. Like, what is this? I hate this guy, right? Like, he was like everyone's hero. Like, he was the working class's hero for like a whole year straight. They're like, oh my God, he's amazing. He goes to work at like 7 in the morning, comes back, eats lunch at 12, comes back home, walks his dog, plays with his family, goes to sleep at like 9 p.m. at night. This guy's my role model. And all of a sudden, the role model collapses because he quit his job. And now he's an influencer. And now he's rented out a fake office and a fake desk and a fake 9 to 5. And subhanAllah, you see when a person, and I'm not saying this about him, I'm not saying this about anybody, but I'm saying when a person puts all of their hopes and their efforts and their stock into this dunya, it'll always disappoint you because everything in this world ends. And I'll give you guys a proof of that. I want you guys, everyone, to think right now, your memory. Think about the most incredible memory you have in your life. Think about the happiest moment you've had in your life. I bet if I asked you to close your eyes and picture it, you'd be able to. You would be able to picture where you were, who you were with, what the scene was, what the time of the year was, what the temperature was, like all that stuff. You'd be able to kind of like read that back to me like a script. But even your best moment was imperfect. And I can guarantee you why. Even if you can't think of one, I'll tell you right now why it was imperfect. It was imperfect because it ended. It didn't last forever. My favorite memory, wallahi, I'll tell you, was when I held my daughter for the first time. And my daughter now is almost 3 and terrorizing my house. I still love her though, alhamdulillah. But I remember, like, I'm like, when I look at Aya now, I hold her, I'm like, you know, I remember when you couldn't move. I mess around with her when it's bedtime at nighttime, because you know when you put a newborn to sleep, you have to hold him like this, basically, like in front of you. And now she just like lays on me like a massive child. And so I'm like, Aya, you want me to hold you like a baby again? So I'm like, I'm like messing around with her to do it. She's like, Papa, stop, no. And I'm like, so it's so incredible, subhanAllah, how life changes, right? Even your favorite memories will change and they will evolve. Allah Ta'ala is the only one that is not changing. He will never change who He is. Okay? So Allahu Samad. And then we get to Lam Yalid wa Lam Yulad. Why are Lam Yalid wa Lam Yulad so important? Lam Yalid, literally, Allah Ta'ala is saying, He does not give birth, Lam Yalid wa Lam Yulad, nor was He born. This was directly a refutation of, obviously, the people at that time that used to believe that Prophet Isa alayhi salam is the son of God, and you know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, a'udhu billah, has a family, all of these different kind of like ideas. And the Quran comes in and the Quran, again, you know, sometimes we think to ourselves that Quran is about faith, but there is a level of logic. If Allah has a family, then like, doesn't a family make you weak in a way? You know, subhanAllah, I have a friend, his name's Maulana Yasser. He, mashallah, runs like this beautiful institution in Irving. And he, mashallah, had his daughter, like, I believe 4 months ago or so. So he's kind of like in the young parent, you know, pool right now. And so I was talking to him and I was like, Sheikh Saab, like, what's it like? Because he has a daughter. He has a 3-month-old daughter. I have a 2.5-year-old daughter. I'm like, what's it like for you? Like, what's the process of being a girl dad for you, Ben? And you know what he told me? Crazy reflection. He said it to me literally yesterday after prayer. He goes, I never feared death until I had my kid. And I asked him, I said, what do you mean? He said, if Allah were to call my name, you know, a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, I would have been okay with it. But he goes, ever since I had my daughter, I actually fear death because I fear being away from her. And her being away from me. And he goes, and I told him yesterday, I was like, subhanAllah, Shaykh Saab, we're literally going over Qul Huwallahu Ahad literally tomorrow. About how literally the idea of family, as much of it as it is a blessing for you and me, family is what makes us humanly weak, actually. Like, think about it. if somebody does something to your family member, would you be the same level-headed person? Absolutely not. I told my good friend Sheikh Mubin upstairs, I said, after I had Aya, I completely was okay with the fate of going to jail if something happened to her. I was like, I will go to jail. I will. If somebody bullies her, it's okay. Inshallah, I'll get out one day. I'll be a better person. But subhanallah, that love, that attachment to my daughter has, as a human being, affected me, right? So when you say about Allah, lam yalid, walam yulad, Allah never gave birth and Allah Ta'ala was never born, you are freeing Allah from any of that weakness. You're freeing Allah from any of that human experience because Allah Ta'ala is nowhere near that. In fact, and this is the kicker here. Allah loves you more than your own parents love you. The only close relationship that Allah can give you to the feeling that He has for you is the love that a mother has for her child. That's the hard part to understand. Like, so Allah is lam yalid wa lam yulad. Allah did not give birth and He was not born. But Allah loves you more than your own mother does. How does that work? And this is just from the fulul of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I will read a narration at the very end that will kind of bring all of this together. And then Allah says, وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٍ. This means that there is none comparable to Him. وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٍ. There is nothing equal to Him. If there's anything in your life that's equal to Allah, you know that something is wrong. If anything in your life allows you to make a decision the same level of influence as Allah, you know something is wrong. There has to be everything else in your life, and there has to be Allah. Because without Allah, you will not have the blessings in your life. I want you guys to think about that. If there are any blessings in your life that you use to disobey Allah, it's Allah who gave you that blessing to begin with. If I use my own emotions to disobey Allah, if I use love to disobey Allah by having, permissible relationships, if I use my anger to harm other people, I'm doing something that Allah gave me to actually disobey Him. If I'm using my happiness and my excitement in a way that harms me and the people around me, then I'm using something that Allah gave me to disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If it wasn't for Allah, I wouldn't have any of these blessings to begin with. So how can I use these blessings to actually, be one who displeases Him? Okay? And so there's a hadith. I'll share this with everybody to end today, inshallah. It's so beautiful. And it's going to make you guys, it actually really kind of made me tear up a little bit when I read it. It's in Sahih Bukhari. I'll read it to you guys, inshallah. The Prophet ﷺ, one time he says, لا أحد أصبر على أذى سمعه من الله. He says, there is no one more patient with something harmful that he hears than Allah. I want you guys to follow me here, okay? He says, there's no one more patient with something harmful that they hear more than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. يَجْعَلُونَ لَهُ وَلَدًا وَهُوَ يَرْزُقُهُمْ وَيُعَافِيهِمْ. Subhanallah. They attribute a son to Him while it is He who gives them sustenance and cures them. So what this hadith is sharing here is that there is no one that we know of that is more forgiving of those who actually slight Him in the wrong way. There are people who claim that God doesn't exist and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala still takes care of them. Think about what your parents did the moment that you disobeyed them when you were a kid. You're like, Mom, you're the worst. Your mom was like, I'm the worst, huh? The chappal comes off, flies at you 40 miles per hour, faster than the normal speed limit. That's just from having one disagreement with your mother. You have one moment of ingratitude towards your parents, and your mom's like, fine, no dinner for you. Have fun. Scourging for squirrel in the backyard, right? Threatening to take your meals away. Now think about people who day after day after day, they curse Allah. They say Allah has a son. They say Allah is not who He is. They say Allah is not even real. We don't need God. We live in a modern day time. We live in technology. We live in blah, 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 the future, this and that, all that stuff. And Allah continues to allow them to eat. Allah continues to allow them to breathe and see and hear. Allah continues to allow them to have experiences in their life. Why? All for the reason of why. Because at the end of the day, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows that the potential of this person to be able to turn themselves around towards Him. This is the love that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has for you. True power, guys. Allah is one of his names is Al-Qadir, the one who is all powerful. And Al-Qadir is not always manifested in punishing people. Punishment does not always mean that you're strong. Strength comes from a person or an individual being able to forgive someone who has wronged them. That is strength. Have y'all ever had to forgive a friend in your life that you know did something messed up to you? Like, you know that they did something that was clearly wrong. And you still, for the sake of Allah, you forgave them for what they did. That is power. Because at that moment, you could have easily exacted revenge. You could have easily been like, oh, that's funny. You like spreading Instagram DMs about me. Hello, my 500 followers. Let me go ahead and let you know about this person. Like, it's so easy for you to be able to do that. But withholding that is actually what makes you a powerful person. So when you think about Allah, there is no one, as the Prophet said, لا أحد أصبر على أذى سميعه من Allah. There is no one that hears more bad things about them, that is more patient about it than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah continues to take care of you. Allah continues to shelter you. Allah continues to give you food, despite all of the neglect that we show Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this Ramadan, what I want everyone to focus on, inshallah, we're going to end in the next minute here because I want everyone to get a good spot for salah. What I want everyone to focus on here is try your hardest in the next 3 weeks, 3.5 weeks of Ramadan, and think to yourself, what are the ways that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes care of me? And any moment that you have where you feel like, I don't feel like praying. I don't feel like, doing my dua. I don't feel like making, istighfar. I don't feel like doing dhikr. I don't feel like reading Quran. At that moment, I want you to think about something that Allah gave you that you never asked for. At that moment, I want you to think of that. And inshallah, that will allow you to motivate yourself and remind yourself of the plethora of blessings that you have in your life and how wrong it would be of a person to deny Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for 5 minutes of dhuhr, especially after everything that He has done for us subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? So we'll end with that inshallah. Next Thursday, we're going to continue on to Surah Al-Falaq. Okay? Anybody who's ever heard of Nazr, right? Nazr ho gaya. We're inshallah going to talk about it next Thursday, inshallah, with قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ الْفَلَقِ مِنْ شَرِّ مَا خَلَقَ. So it's a lot about like the human effect on our surroundings and those around us, inshallah. So we're going to go forward with that, inshallah, next Thursday. We'll pause here for the day. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us of the people who worship Him the way that Allah ta'ala deserves to be worshipped. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us of the people who never neglect Allah ta'ala in our life. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us of the people who follow the example of His Habib sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us of the people who are constantly thinking about Allah and making our decisions through Allah. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive us in the many times that we've fallen short. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept from us the good that we have done so far this month of Ramadan. Ameen Rabbil Alameen. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك ونشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. Jazakum khairan, guys. Thank you so much. Alhamdulillah. We'll see y'all inshallah for Ramadan nights tomorrow. Myself and Sheikh Mikael inshallah will be here tomorrow night at 10 o'clock. So inshallah the hall will probably be packed out. So inshallah get here on time. We'll be starting inshallah right around 10 o'clock. We'll see y'all inshallah tomorrow night. Assalamu alaikum.